started?
Sure.
I'd like to, it's my pleasure as an East Boston resident to introduce my friend and neighbor, Kanan T. I'm not going to attempt your last name.
Don't worry about it. I don't attempt it either.
Who's done so much for our community through this horrible, tragic last year. You've brought joy to the neighborhood. You've worked diligently to make sure everyone is fed. Those of us who could buy a farm share enjoyed that. Those of us who couldn't, we're super grateful for the food aid that you coordinated. So thank you, Kanan. I'm looking forward to hear how you took a space that teaches people how to grow food in an urban setting and changed it into an oasis of hope during the pandemic. Take it away, Kanan.
Thank you, Mary, for that kind introduction. I'm going to share my screen now. Good afternoon, everyone. And let's see.
Only the truth, nothing but the truth.
All right. I assume you can see my screen now. Are you able to see my screen? Give me a nod or a thumbs up or something. All right, great. Sounds very good. And thank you everyone for joining. I think it's a couple of minutes after 1, so we'll get started. And thank you, Michelle, for organizing it. I would like to attend the whole day. Just actually, we're doing food. It's a delivery today, so I was just doing some work on that. So good to be here, and thank you, Mary, for being here and moderating, and thank you, Michelle, again for organizing, and thank you, everyone, for being present here to learn us a little bit about what we've learned over the past year. So Eastie Farm is this small urban farm in East Boston. We started as a venture by some neighbors to clean up an abandoned lot and bring some life to it, make a green open space out of it, so where people can gather and grow food together. So that was the idea. That was the starting of the organization. That was back in 2015. In this presentation, we're going to be specifically talking about how we've responded to COVID. And very quickly, I'll just go through how the organization started with an abandoned lot and started cleaning it up. And today has created this space that has been useful last year. This wasn't why we set up this patio, but it turned out to be very, very useful for distributing food from. And the back of that first space that we started with looks kind of like this. It looked like this last spring. It was much more grown in by summer, and now it looks very different in the winter, of course. So that's just one of the lots. Part of the COVID response also included comedy sessions. As we all know, many people were feeling pretty stressed, and it was a physical constraint for many that we had to be locked down. We had to not get together with people, and we had to not do many social things that we were otherwise used to doing. That caused many kinds of stresses, including mental stress. And one way we tried to bring some relief was through this comedy sessions in that space. So that we had set up a community space in the middle. That's been helpful to serve that particular purpose. Through this year, we've also been trying to keep the area clean, because when you see a clean neighborhood, you feel better. So we've been paying attention to not just our space, but the space around us. And we've grown quickly from one site to multiple sites. We have about 6 sites, going on 7 this year around the neighborhood. And this one you see in the middle is at the Sam Adams School. It's tucked away, this nice garden in the back of Sam Adams, but it is on top of this hill. It used to be called Camp Hill. Mary knows. And so we've got this nice view of the city skyline. So just giving you a little bit of background. The organization does, as I said, community building, which means getting together and having fun, having kids in the space for environmental education, and also growing food. So now getting to COVID, it's been mostly in our neighborhood, what was started as a health crisis became an economic crisis, and then became a food crisis. the demographics we have in our neighborhood. I'm sure many of you know. I'm happy to talk about this later as well in some detail. So the food response was really the main part of our work. These two young men here were helping out. We employed them to help with this work. They are what we consider critically homeless, which means they've been homeless for over 5 years. So has been a stepping stone for them to get some economic stability. And from there, going on to having a better life than what they were suffering from earlier. That is why it's kind of the reason why I call this um, feed the seed, because even though we've been responding to COVID and reacting to it in many ways, COVID has also presented us with an opportunity for how we can bring about transformation and address some of the underlying causes which led to all these consequences that we've been experiencing over the past year. And one of those underlying causes is, of course, economic inequity. So we've been trying to figure out how we can address that. So employing these young men was part of that. And the scale of food response that we've done has been something that we did not foresee at all. We hope that we've been able to match somewhat the amount of need and the crisis that the neighborhood has been going through, but it has been way above our capacity. We've been trying our level best to see what we can do to address. And of course, we've not been the only organization working on this, thankfully. So many other organizations have been addressing the food needs in the community. But even ours has been pretty overwhelming. Since March of last year, we have not taken a single week of break in terms of our food work. So this is one of the volunteers. There were many folks who finished their 9 to 5 work, even though they were all working from home. And then 5 o'clock stepped outside and picked up the food from the site and delivered it to people. We have been doing delivery as opposed to pickup from the very beginning. There's still a little bit of pickup happens, but we've been focusing mainly on delivery just to avoid the risk for people of contracting or transmitting the virus. So that has worked out really well. That has also brought a lot of other folks in the community in touch with those who have been suffering most. And you may be aware that East Boston has been going through a displacement crisis for a while now, for several years. And some folks have been internally displaced, which means, you have your kid going to school in the neighborhood, you have a life in the neighborhood, you don't want to leave the neighborhood, even if you have to. So what you end up doing is you move in with a family member, you move in with a neighbor, you move in with a friend, and that has led to crowding in many of the apartments. Some apartments we would call and figure out who's living there so we can bring food. We would see multiple last names in the same apartment. And when we dug a little deeper into that, we realized many 2-bedroom apartments had 2 families living there. Many 3-bedroom apartments had 3 families living there. So with that level of crowding, many of these families were just sitting ducks for COVID. If one of them got the disease, everyone else was going to get it. There was no chance to escape for them because of the proximity with which they were living. So that's just a direct consequence of a more systemic issue that have been going on for a long time for us to understand better. So this is just more images of our COVID response. The food work, I should say, we kept the seedling work going as well throughout the crisis because we didn't want to give up on that. Many of our operations were, of course, impacted, but we just spread it out. We got creative. We made appointments with people. We left the seedlings there so they could just come and pick up, and we made it touch-free as much as possible. And so it took a lot of safety measures, but kept the operations going. So that's something important to point out because it is important to be resilient in the face of this crisis. And we found that you can be. Respect the virus, respect its ability to do incredible damage to the human body. At the same time, don't give up on what you need to do. So figure out where that correct balances. So we've been extremely safe, helping people be safe at the same time, carrying on all our tasks. On the food bit, I just want to step back and talk about how various partnerships have led us to do very large scale food work. Mothers Out Front, we've been always active in the climate front. Mothers Out Front, some of you may know, is an excellent group that is national and have been working on climate from the perspective of mothers. They say actually mothers, grandmothers, and others. They're actually inclusive of everybody. But when you think about the child, which is the mother's primary concern, and climate change is a big problem, and it gets bigger as our children become adults. So when you think about future, it's a much bigger problem. In that sense, all the kids and all upcoming generations are climate justice or form a climate justice community. So it makes sense that Mothers Out Front is a primary force in working on climate. And they've not been just working on climate, they've been reaching into communities and helping. When the Merrimack River Valley incident happened, the gas explosion happened, there was a lot of life lost. Mothers Out Front got involved in Lawrence very intimately and established this good relationship with faith communities and all that. So when the COVID crisis hit, they went back and used all those connections to start serving people. And that led them to working with restaurants and restaurants serving food through Mothers Out Front to people who needed food. And when that happened, many restaurants from around the Eastern Massachusetts area reached out to Mothers Out Front and said, how can we help? And they connected us with a restaurant in Lynn and said, get the food from them. They will give it to you at cost. You all remember, even restaurants were suffering. They didn't have customers. They didn't have business. So this idea of Mothers Out Front was for this restaurant in Lynn, Christopher's Cafe, to make food and serve it to us at cost, meaning whatever it cost them to keep people employed and to keep the lights on, not market rate. So that made it possible for us to start bringing food right away as soon as the crisis hit to many people in the neighborhood. But that was a small scale. But we learned from that, and then we applied to the city of Boston under the Boston Resiliency Fund to do it in a much larger scale, connecting to restaurants like Banh Mi, which have a lot of employees from East Boston, but also very well set up to do operations safely and to do delivery to our sites safely. And Tawakal, which was making halal food, and there's a good sizable population, Muslim population in the neighborhood, and you need to be culturally sensitive when you're serving food to people. So we made flavorful food that is hot, healthy, and good to eat. And so this is what we brought to people. We were serving more than 5,000 meals a week during the height of the crisis. And that was thanks to this connection that Mothers Out Front made with the Lynn restaurant, where we learned how to do this and brought that idea to Boston Resiliency Fund and got funded in a bigger way to do that work. So, that you see also that there's an economic component to that. It wasn't just raising money to just serve food to people, but also helping the restaurants survive as well. If they could just tread water during this crisis, they could come out on the other end still intact and then start doing their business again as usual. And Chinatown wasn't serving adult meals at the time. So Eastie Farm's the one that worked with Y and connected with Banh Mi to serve food in Chinatown. So that picture there on the left is actually in Chinatown. And an Encore contacted us with flower plants. And so we set them up so neighbors can pick them up. So this was touch-free. Remember, nobody was allowed to go out and share things. And this was this extremely tense times. So we set it up so people can pick one up for themselves and bring one for their neighbor, just trying to keep some sort of link going on with people during this very, very difficult time where people wanted to socialize and couldn't. So that was, we were trying to be holistic in what we were addressing, not just the food needs, but as humans, we have so much more, and we were trying to be sensitive to that. On the right, you see all the way to the end of the year, when there's a co-op, immigrant women co-op called Puntada in East Boston. And we worked with them, paid them to decorate wreaths so we could bring these holiday wreaths to people. And some got them for free, some paid a good amount of money, as just as donation to the farm, as donation to the co-op, and also as a fee for the decoration and for the wreath. So it was on a sliding scale. So this sort of thing, the economic component was always there in whatever we've been doing. And the idea of sowing the seed of a new economy. If you think about cooperatives and democratic way of making decisions in organizations, that's better for workers. So the kind of organizations that we've been helping also has also taken into consideration what kind of organization is this? How do they treat their workers? And are they part of a new economy that could be more just and sustainable? And is it helping people who are marginalized, who have the talent, who have the skill, but don't have the opportunities to show their ability and make a living out of that? So that kind of holistic thinking has always been in the back of our minds as we've been doing this relief work. Here's Chef Matt showing how to do food preservation. He has done a lot of work during COVID response. One thing we did, I don't think I have a picture here, but I'll say, Mary, you can keep me on time because there's a lot here.
You're doing very good, Kanan. We do have a question in the chat. Deborah asks, this is an incredible program. Do you have thoughts about how to propagate this to other parts of the city? Or do you have information on where else this is happening in the city now? But
Well,
that's the only question we have.
Okay, yeah, we're not the only
You're doing
ones
great for time.
Yeah, thank you. We're not the only ones to be doing this sort of thing, but there may be some ideas here that others can take from. I think there are. Later on, I'll talk about how some of the things we've learned here, we have taken it to a larger scale in a sense. But I welcome your thoughts on how we could spread these ideas around, whatever you think is a good idea, how we can spread these around the city and elsewhere. But there may be some specific ones I can address later as well. So Chef Matt, one thing he helped us with, you all remember how restaurants had to be shut down. Many restaurants were shut down. We rented one such restaurant in East Boston so we could use the kitchen. And we got, we're all familiar with the ugly but lovely kind of produce, right? Something that has a blemish or a bruise on it, but it really is completely healthy. And so Red Cross Food Bank had all these fruits, vegetables that they were going to compost. And we got them, we created a relationship with them and we got them. All we had to do was pay for transportation. And we got it into this kitchen that we rented. And Chef Matt made naan, naan bread out of the content, out of some of the ingredients we got from them, from the food bank. And he made this wonderful vegetable stew. And this was just a great way to stretch the small amount of dollars we had, but come up with this tasty, healthy food that we could serve to a lot more people. Remember, we were paying restaurants at cost to have them make the food. But at the same time, we were also doing an experiment with how can we stretch the dollar further, bring more meals to more people. So we were experimenting with things like this. And we all know food waste is a big issue. So one of the things that's always in the back of our mind is how do we avoid or reduce food waste and then turn it into something that addresses where the need is. Even before COVID, Eastie Farms have been working on how do we connect where there's food excess to where there's food need. But this made that need very acute. And so we had to respond in more creative ways. So Chef Matt has been helping us with that. And it was actually very good, very tasty, healthy food, but we could produce it at a lower cost because the ingredients we didn't actually have to pay for. They were from a food bank. And even during the crisis, we've also been doing other programs. So you could see here, that's from Bootstrap Compost, a demonstration as to how composting is done. Different people want to do different levels of composting. You have more time or you have more money or whatever. So we tried to come up with multiple schemes that would fit whatever your needs may be and try to present that to folks so they could learn. There's more and more interest in composting in the neighborhood and in the city and the state, hopefully. So we've been trying to respond to that. But this is, as you can see, people are wearing masks. So this is happening right during the crisis. Another thing that we did that was very fun is we partnered with this organization called Adventera. They create environmental games, and they're board games. So they're traditional board games, which means you play with people that you're close to, that you're sitting across the table from, at home, somewhere else, or somewhere else. So it's not a cyber game. It's not something you play on the computer. Everybody was wanting time away from the screen. At the same time, couldn't leave home. So people were going stir crazy, right? So how do we respond to this kind of interesting, constrained situation that we're in, while also creating some ways for people to have fun? So we raised funds to have Adventera give these games for free. I mean, these sell for at least like $25 each. And many of the families in the community probably will never buy one of these, right? So $25 is quite a sum of money for many people to come up with. So our idea was to raise funds and donate these games to the families so they could be home, play the games as the family, and have fun and stay away from the virus, basically. So that worked really well. A lot of families adopted that. We also did some outdoor game playing at the farm. So that's part of that. Outside of this, Eastie Farm has been supporting Mutual Aid East Boston and Cosecha, Massachusetts. In the case of Mutual Aid East Boston, we are the fiscal sponsor. So we created the website, the fund site, raised funds through our connections, probably more than $150,000, probably closer to $200,000 raised to help people. And this is not just with food, but actually more about the current needs that they were facing, whether it had to do with utilities or they had to pay their phone bills so they could at least keep a phone on their hand to reach for help, and other kinds of support that people needed. So mutual aid has been doing that. So it's been in a response mode, but the spirit of mutual aid is for people to come together and learn from each other and support each other, not to see ourselves as givers and takers, not have this charity mindset, but instead, how do we build power as a community? How do we come together? How do we inform each other of our rights, our responsibilities, our abilities? How do we give ourselves the agency and exercise the agency that we already have? So mutual aid operates with that. So it has all these circles and people come together, discuss and make decisions and solve problems on their own. So that's been the spirit of mutual aid. Eastie Farm has been one of the coordinators, as well as the fiscal sponsor. Mutual aid is this ad hoc group of community members and organizations. So there is no real like registered entity called Mutual Aid East Boston. So it's just a group. So it needed a fiscal sponsor. The Eastie Farm has been serving that purpose. Cosecha, Massachusetts, some of you may know, it's an immigrant rights group. And when COVID hit, most of us, all of us were affected in one way or the other, but some of us were affected more, as we all know. And if you were already marginalized, and then the kind of federal administration that we had earlier, making people scared even more, it's been very difficult for the immigrant community, particularly the undocumented immigrant community in the state. Cosecha, Massachusetts needed some way to raise funds for them and help them. And so we've also been the fiscal sponsor for Cosecha, Massachusetts. And that's a picture from Cosecha, Massachusetts. I'll get to the question about how do we take the lessons we've learned and bring them up to a bigger scale. This is our state rep, Adrian Modero, and he's giving out food at Eastie Farm here. And the food boxes he's giving out are from World Farmers. It's an organization in Lancaster, Mass. World Farmers have also been doing CSA. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of that. So even through COVID, we started up a CSA program, community supported agriculture. So there's, excuse me, so there's more awareness of eating local food that also reduces food miles. So overall, it reduces carbon emissions. So it's a good way to fight climate and eat healthy at the same time. So we've been promoting CSA, and World Farmers have been bringing us food. And I mentioned earlier that displacement has been going on in the neighborhood, but the flip side of it is we have a lot of new residents with some disposable income, and also with this awareness of local economy, local food, and all that. So there has been a lot of interest in a CSA program. So we connected the two and made our site into a site where people can pick up CSA bags. But at the same organization, World Farmers, also got a USDA grant with our support. So they sent us free produce, which we've been giving out to folks as well. Everybody's been giving out all kinds of food, but we've been trying to focus on what's healthy, what's local, what's more produce, vegetables, fruits, and as a farm, that's been our focus. So here's our state rep giving out the free food, and the food is giving out is from World Farmers in Lancaster, but they actually put it together from multiple farms in the Pioneer Valley area. So that means this is already a state program. We're getting the food. I mean, Eastie Farm has these few lots, and we grow a little bit of food, but it's by no means enough to feed the need in the neighborhood. So most of the food we've been giving out has been coming from around the state. Gaining Ground sent a lot of food. Many farms around the state have been sending us food. One time there was a huge truck that showed up with a lot of Brussels sprouts. Just showed up with like a ton of like 10 pallets of Brussels sprouts. And we were just like, where are we going to park this truck and how are we going to unload it? It was a huge project to go to, Alex DeFranco helped there. He gave us the truck, and we used the truck to go get a forklift from Brandon at the shipyard and use the forklift to take the Brussels sprouts off of there. So the farms have been very helpful, and World Farmers here has been doing the CSA program and the free food program. So Adrian Motter, our rep, who has been helping, has also been asking, how do we take what we've learned here in our neighborhood and turn that into the legislation? So some of you may be tuned into legislation season. So last month is when legislation had to be filed. And that's when the bill gets a docket number, and then it goes through its committees and all that, and then becomes a law if it's passed all the way through the House and then signed by the governor. So that takes whatever time it takes. So our state reps request to us was, how do we learn from this and create state law out of this? And there were two bills that came out of that initial request. Eastie Farm is also part of this organization called Mass Renews Alliance, which is about a long-term environmental policy that's healthy, but in the short term, thinking about food and housing, and how do we create healthy housing that's based on clean energy? How do we create healthy food? So these are the questions that the organization goes after. And we've been focusing on the food justice portion. So two bills came out of this: food justice with jobs and food justice frontline. Food justice with jobs and food justice frontline. So if you go to the state website, Massachusetts legislature website, go to bills and search for food justice, you'll see bills, these two bills pop up. And food justice with jobs, food justice frontline. The bills are about many things, but it is about, I'd say maybe a few salient features about creating more land for people to grow food. Number one. Number two, paying community organizations to solve food security in their communities in ways that they know how to tailor the solution to their communities. Everything we've done here may not apply to other communities. But if you let the local organizations figure out the solutions, they'll figure out the most cost-effective and the most effective solutions, because they know what the problems are. They're connected to the people experiencing the problems. So instead of having a top-down kind of solution, this bottom-up approach of how to solve food security was the idea that came out of this. So that's another thing that would be funded by the bill if it passes. And hopefully you all can help pass it by talking to your representative and your state senator and to ask them to support the food justice bills. So that's another thing it would do. There were young people who were also part of the Mass Renews Alliance organization who came to us and said, I don't know how many of you know about the Healthy Incentives Program that Massachusetts has to match SNAP, to match the food support program, the federal food programs. So that one, HIP or Healthy Incentive Program, will allow you to buy local produce, Massachusetts grown produce, which is always good. You're eating local, which means the local farmers making some money, which is good, which also means you're keeping the food miles down and emissions down and all of that. So HIP program, what the young people were saying is, could we help families learn about this program? As it turns out, this wonderful program is actually not fully utilized. Why? People don't know about it. So the young people's idea was, can we do some social media? Can we do some outreach? Can we go across like linguistic boundaries, which young people are good at, social media and all that, and they're also bilingual and trilingual and all that because of the context they grow up in. So their idea was, let us do some outreach so that these wonderful programs are actually utilized by people who need them, who currently don't even know about them. So this bill would also fund that work, pay young people to do the outreach, to let people know about these great programs that exist in the state, but people don't know about. So those are the kind of things it would do, pay community organizations to solve food security in the most cost-effective manner, create more space for growing. That could be open land, it could be indoor spaces for doing hydroponics or something like that, roof space for having roof gardens. So just getting creative. And the last thing it would do is to pay people, regular folks, to have a raised bed in their front yard, backyard, or side yard. Urban soil is very contaminated, as we all know, with lead. And you don't even have to test it. You can just assume it's got lead. So you can't grow in there, which means people need to buy clean soil. They need to buy some sort of edging for the raised bed, maybe wood, and they need to buy soil amendments. They need to buy seeds, and they also need ongoing support for growing things. So these are all the things that the bill would do. So one way we've taken what we've learned through the year and applied it to a larger scale is this one direct way I can think of. And the initiative was actually the state representatives. And as I said, Mass Renews Alliance has been thinking about this sort of things anyway. So it was a good coming together of a bottom-up approach and a top-down approach. And hopefully this bill, these two bills will pass, and these solutions can be leveraged around the state. So that's what I have so far in terms of feeding the seed. The idea is, yes, a crisis happened and we need to respond to it, but instead of just applying larger and larger band-aids, how do we use that as an opportunity to feed a seed of transformation that can create a world where we are more resilient to a crisis like this, better prepared to handle it, but also just have higher immunity as a society, a stronger, cohesive society where there's this sort of mutual help thing is not just something a few people do, but it becomes the DNA of how we operate. So that's the kind of world we'd like to see. So I'd like to think we took this opportunity, and we're still taking this opportunity to sow more seeds of that new world.
Thank you so much, Kannan. There's a couple of questions in the chat. Susan wanted to know, does Eastie Farm have paid staff?
Eastie Farm does have, it's a good question. So in 2019, we did not have any paid staff. We had an AmeriCorps person. 2020, our AmeriCorps person became a half-time person. And because we didn't have any staff, we couldn't apply for PPP or anything like that, right? So we had no such ability, and we've not had much operational funds. We get some grants for capital work, like when we get a piece of land, how to set it up for better access and things like that. But we don't have much operational funds. So the AmeriCorps person became a half-time staff member. And then later on, we raised more funds. Boston Foundation gave us a little bit of operation funds. East Boston Foundation gave a little bit as well. So we just kind of have been pulling together, saving some money. And this year we've turned Alex, who is our farm manager, who's an AmeriCorps person, turned to a half-time. Now he's full-time. And we also have added another half-time person. So we have 1.5 people.
We have lots of time. We've got a couple really interesting comments around the idea of how to find land to do this on. Avril says that she recently learned that the Massachusetts Bureau of Land Use is supposed to keep track of vacant public land that can be used for gardening, and she put a link in the chat. She's not sure if they actually do, though, or how to get access to that info. And Jennifer followed up with, the city of Boston has also done this kind of inventory, as well as an inventory of rooftops that could be used to grow food. Not sure how to access it, but the Boston Food Access Council is a place to start. And she gives the Facebook link in the chat.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
could you tell me a little bit about how did Eastie Farm, because that happened, that was before I moved to the neighborhood. How did you get permission to use this vacant lot? How did that work? And what would you advise someone who's maybe sees a vacant city property that could maybe have this kind of transformation?
Great questions, and that's a very important pointer too. There is still a lot of land that we could be using for this purpose or other, community friendly purposes, both state owned and city owned, and also privately owned. And if you want to see an inventory of what the city has, at least for City of Boston, it's property.boston.gov, and you'll be able to see an inventory there. That's where they're maintaining that list. The state, I think it's a different approach. If you do see state-owned land, you can always go to MDAR, Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources, and initiate a conversation with them. They're very helpful if this is your goal. And they have, and if you happen to be in an urban area, they have urban ag grants as well, which you can get to acquire the land and to do things. So the way we did that was pretty interesting. It wasn't, we had no clue that this is city-owned land or anything. And so this just on my way to the subway station from when I walk from home to the Blue Line station. And it's always been an abandoned space, and people have been throwing trash because it just was like, looked neglected. And so you abuse it more. It was going through that vicious cycle. Monica, who was running a vegetarian restaurant in the neighborhood in 2015, she had the idea that we use a space like this to grow vegetables and to serve in the restaurant. And so a few people gathered around that idea and applied for a temporary permit to go into this.
I'm sorry.
If you could mute yourself.
Let me see if I can find who that is. Did that fix it? Yeah, there we go.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, but once we started, and this was a new concept for the city. The city is very well set up to work with developers, but when you approach it as a grassroots community organization, that's pretty hard. They don't exactly know what to do with you. But our local neighborhood association, Jeffreys Point Neighborhood Association, was very helpful. They had asked for, what would you do with a space like this? And they had already asked us to think about it because they knew we were thinking about going in there. It was turned out to be city-owned land. And I even have a picture of a ticket that the city had issued to itself for neglecting the space. So anyway, I think we were going to save them some ticket money if we were going to take over the space. So this was owned by D&D, Department of Neighborhood Development. When we approached them, they only gave us temporary permit. And the way it works is the calendar year. So they gave us the permit like in July or something, and the permit ended December 31st. So that was all we got. This was in 2015. And it was already late. And by the time we got in there, did a lot of cleaning. There was a lot of cleaning to do. It took multiple weeks, and then set up some raised beds and grew some flowers. So it looks like somebody cares for this and nobody abuses the space. And that really worked. However, there wasn't much growing season left to grow anything. So we put garlic in the ground. And at the end of the year, we went to the city and said, and many of you have probably heard the story before, but this is exactly how it worked. That's why we have the land now. So I have to say what happened. Went to the city and said, we put garlic in the ground. And so you have to extend the permit. And they were like, no, we weren't planning on extending the permit. this was it. But what did you put in the ground? I said, garlic. No, we can't harvest it until next summer. And they didn't quite have a plan for the land by that time. So they gave us the permit for the next year. It was another temporary permit, but it was for a whole calendar year. So we're very happy because we're going to get in there in the spring and we could just have a whole growing season. In the meantime, Jeffreys Point Neighborhood Association actually did a call to the entire neighborhood to say, whoever's got ideas for this space, come and present. So we went in there, presented this idea of community garden, but not a traditional community garden where everybody gets a lot and then you lock the garden. And even though, these days, the community gardens are doing much better in terms of having community days, but that's individually owned and the rest of the community sort of feels like an outsider. So in this case, it's like you're on a waiting list somewhere else, you can come here, you can hang out, you can do work, but everybody works together in this space with the idea of giving, not taking. So the harvest from here went to the soup kitchen, it went to a couple of church-based food pantries, it went to the family shelter, Crossroads Family Shelter. So it was for giving. That was the idea behind this. And people took to that. And there was some skepticism about that kind of new paradigm, but actually it worked out very well for us. It's an open space. We never lost anything except maybe like one water can or something was just left outside. And we also, I know people said, this kind of people coming together and working on something won't work. And that turned out to be wrong because people do have this thirst for community and came together and did this repeatedly. People came back every Saturday and worked on the space with a ton of work, couldn't have done without a lot of people getting involved. So the city saw that. I think the mayor gave us, 2016, the mayor gave us a community engagement award. And after that, the city put out an RFP based on what we've been doing. And the request for proposal, we answered the proposal, and the city went through its own community process. So what started in 2015 only ended in 2019. In 2019, the city conveyed the property to Eastie Farm, which had by then formed as a nonprofit organization, a registered organization. So Eastie Farm now owns this space with some conditions. We have to continue to care for this. We can't neglect it. And we have to keep it as this community space that's growing things and whatnot. So that's what it took. It took a long time and it took concerted effort. And the idea of creating something new also means that you have to nudge here, push a little there, and get creative in how you get things done, so that you really have to be there and put in time and put in timely time and be there in the space for people to see that you're doing some placemaking. People will only enter the space if they see somebody there. Otherwise, they feel like they're encroaching and they're going to somebody else's space. So that kind of effort you need to put in for this to happen. But it took a long time. That's why if you think about the bill would help creating what are community land trusts, the food justice bill, which means instead of us taking 16 years to get 4 lots, it could get 4 lots in 1 year, get people employed, get more food producing sooner. So it would be a different way of doing things that would expedite this good transformation in a big, big way. So yes, that's what it took. It took a lot to get the land and to do this, but it can be done. And when by people coming together and putting in time, putting in work, and it is wonderfully beneficial. It just keeps on giving dividends week after week and has the long-term benefits of growing soil health, of growing community health. So, it just feels all good to me.
It's as a blessed Eastie resident, I'm very grateful. It's all good to me. We have a question from Alice. She'd like for you to remind us how you keep in touch with all the Eastie neighbors. Do you use on-site signage, social media, both, all of the above? Talk about outreach.
All of the above, indeed. I'll give you some examples. Even in a small community, every small community is a world. In fact, there are many worlds in every small community. And we as humans have very limited capacity to recognize everybody we see and remember their names and their context and all of that. So it's really not going to work if you're going to just try to create a direct link with everyone. So it has to be a collaboration. For example, we go to the schools and the schools are connected to their families and they have trusted relationships. And that's what connects us to the entire set of families that are covered through schools. We go to other youth organizations. We go to organizations like Maverick Landing. We go to schools like Donald McKay and Sam Adams. And we work with Mutual Aid Eastie Group that connects to a whole new set of people. So I think it's just working very closely with various organizations that are doing this kind of work and that are connected in the community. And by connecting to organizations, you're connecting to people. And of course, you can also directly connect with people, which we do all the time when we're there. And if somebody passes by, we ask them to come in. And if they're interested, get their contact information, then keep them in touch as to what's going on. So that we are on social media. We're pretty active on Facebook. If you go to facebook.com/Eastie Farm, you'll see a lot of that. There's some amount of activity in Twitter, even less activity on Instagram. But there's also email that we try to keep growing our friends list. So we contact people through that. And we use WhatsApp. Not everybody's doing email, as we know. So through WhatsApp, we connect with people who prefer that channel. So really, you just have to figure out what vehicles of communication work for people and use that. So you have to have this multi-pronged approach. And we try to be present in the community, go to community organization meetings, take a few minutes there, tell people what is going on. And there are many people who don't go to these meetings. And so you have to keep a very active eye on all the other organizations. But really, by showing up where people are is how you can stay connected. And people are always gathering, organizing, doing something or other. By just taking some initial effort in figuring out which those organizing spaces are and showing up in those spaces is how you would really connect with people. We also created multiple of these spaces. Like I mentioned very quickly, we have 6 spaces. They're kind of strewn around the neighborhood so that no matter where you are, you can walk to an Eastie Farm space in like 10 minutes or so. And so that also makes it more visible and available to people. And the only other point I would make is no matter what agenda you come with, as long as you pay attention to the needs of the community and plug into that, it'll be easier for them to learn about you. So yeah, social media, I think our elected officials are very helpful as well. And neighborhood association folks like Mary have been extremely helpful in spreading the information, keeping us connected and giving us some resources and support as we need them. So that's my answer. Mary, do you want to add anything to that?
No, that was very complete. We have another question from Heather, though. Heather wants to know if you know of other similar efforts building community and food security through community farming being done elsewhere in the Boston area. And does Eastie Farm have connections with these other groups?
Yes, urban farming. Sorry, go ahead.
And Brucey suggested maybe Oasis on Baloo in Dorchester, but
yes, there are multiple organizations. With COVID, there have been some newer organizations as well, like Community Fridge kind of thing, Dorchester Community Fridge. But Urban Farming Institute does a lot of food work. And Boston Food Forest Coalition, the Food Project. And these are all, there's more. These are all wonderful organizations doing food-related work and farming-related work in the city and outside. And Project Bread is actually based in East Boston, and they're more of like a statewide support, and they fight hunger, and they raise money, and they support organizations doing work. And so these are all some organizations that come to mind. And Office of Food Access, somebody mentioned earlier, have a good list of organizations as well with the city of Boston. And so, yes, and we are very much connected to them. And when we started, we couldn't have even had all the ideas that were needed to start without these organizations. We've been connected to them and getting their active support right from the beginning. And we are connected, and we also try to give back whatever we can to these other organizations.
We're very good on time. We have another 15 minutes or so. So if people have questions, please enter them. I'm putting some links into the chat. There's a survey we'd like you to fill out. Fill out the event survey for a chance to win a $25 gift certificate to City Natives Nursery. And there's some other links from the trustees that I've put in the chat for everyone. But we've got plenty of time, so please ask your questions. It's so good to spend time with you, Kanan.
Yeah, it's good to be here. I like the interactive sessions anyway, so I'm glad I got done with the presentation.
One of my first memories of Eastie Farm was when I had first moved to the neighborhood in kind of in the fall of 2016. I walked by there and I asked you, I think, is it really open? Can I really just go and sit? And I would go and sit under the big mulberry tree at the back, just because it's such a beautiful place and that's such a beautiful tree.
Yeah. Thank you, Mary. Yeah. So that space actually got noticed by Trust for Public Land when they came around to visit the space. And they noticed that the temperature under the mulberry tree there was 10 to 15 degrees lower than it was on the street on a hot summer day. And they also noticed that we were taking the water away from the neighbors, downspouts, like stormwater away from the neighbors, and we were using that for gardening. And if we hadn't done that, that water would be causing flooding when there's extreme precipitation, meaning too much rain. And when, even if it's not too much rain, it's chronic water damage for your foundations and your walls. And so when we took that water away, they got rid of that problem, didn't have to worry about that, the neighbors. So the Trust for Public Land saw that, and they saw what we're doing with the mulberry tree and creating that little, I don't know if when you went in there, the hammock was there. It's just like a beautiful spot to just sit and lie down and read. So they noticed all that. So they invited us to speak at a session they had at the aquarium for climate smart cities. It's about how to create spaces in cities that would help fight urban heat island effect. You know, urban heat island effect is the developed environment tends to emit radiation back at us. As opposed to soil, it would absorb the heat, whereas concrete, like a pavement, would just emit the heat back. So you actually experience more heat when you're in an urban setting. And so given that climate change is going to make everything warm, urban heat island effect only makes it worse. So creating spaces like this could make it cooler is the idea. So that's kind of why they invited us to talk about how creating these spaces would be good. So it looks like somebody's able to use their cursor on the screen. I don't know who that is.
Oh, it's not me. I'm not sure who that is.
Okay, we'll stop that. And
okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
So there's a couple questions in the chat or comments. Brucey, I'm going to go in reverse order a little bit because we're on the topic of trees. Brucey said that regarding trees and urban heat islands, an act establishing the municipal reforestation program, and you can see it in the chat from Senator Cynthia Cream, is up. And it's a powerful strategy for climate change mitigation and environmental justice. Danae says we need to plant more trees. I can't agree more. And then earlier, Brucey said, have you worked with FoodLink and Boston area gleaners? And Susan Prager said another great group is Nubia. So
yes,
that's what I
agree with all that. I would add to the tree topic, Speak for the Trees is another organization to remember. And oh yes, any act, city level, state level, that preserves trees, we need to support. It is possible to do development without cutting down trees. You just do your design around what already exists. And planting a tree today is not quite a replacement for a mature tree that already exists today. So there are some things you could do. Some trees can be moved, but many trees are extremely hard to just transplant. But you can design around trees. And we need plenty more trees. And there's just like so many benefits. People who study climate change talk about climate adaptation and climate mitigation and climate resilience. And trees give you all of that. And without having to put in any extra money for creating new technology. So yes, support any tree anywhere that you can find and keep it and plant more trees in the city. We definitely need more trees. Our tree cover could be a lot better. And yes, Nubia, good pointer. Grassroots Fund, wonderful organization. They've been helping us right from the beginning as well. Let's see. Okay, so I'm curious. Do you know of a space where you live that you think could be transformed? And what would it take for you to take that first step to transforming that, you think? What's your hindrance?
And you can reply in the chat and I'll read it out, or if you raise your hand, I'll try to get you unmuted.
Susan Pranger would like to speak.
So there is a space around the corner that somebody has said, oh, gee, couldn't we do a garden here? And the problem is it requires somebody like you, Cannon, to go out there and do it. I already coordinate a community garden. I've got my fingers in too many pies. I just cannot take on another project. And so the hard part is finding somebody who's going to be that leader who drums up more support and does it. Because I think there are people who are willing to sort of pitch in, but they don't want to be the point person.
Right.
And that's a real stumbling block. So I'm really impressed by all the work that you've done with volunteers, but it's hard. And I live in JP where there's a lot of development going on. So a lot of people are just dealing with displacement and housing issues and development, and COVID and taking this on is just, they all think it's a great idea, but nobody's willing to step up and do it.
Yeah.
Or they are, but they're doing other projects. So this one is just.
No, very good point. And I take that point because it can't be just a few people making everything happen. And there is also a mindset that we have. It's like, if you give me a job to do, define my job really well, then I can do it. But then if it's an open-ended kind of thing, I'm really not sure how to get started, how to take leadership, how to take risk, and how to figure out who to go to for what. And all of that seems like unexplored territory. And so that's hard for a lot of people because I think the way we do our education is, don't worry about it, we'll tell you exactly what to do, right? And then you can just do that, and that'll be a job, and you'll have a condo and a car, and you'll be all set. And so that, I think that paradigm hasn't worked well for more creative and open-minded and independent thinking and exploring ideas and trying things and failing and messing up and being fine with that. So that's really not promoted that well, and that's maybe part of the problem. So you're identifying more leaders, the lack of more leaders as a problem. I think it's a real hindrance. Yeah, I was expecting you were going to say, oh, it's hard to get a permit or whatever. No, but this is actually a very important one. It's getting more people to do stuff. So we've been trying to encourage, kids of any age come to the space. We try to encourage them to take a very active role. We've been successful somewhat in that case, but at least with some young folks. and just encourage them to do what they feel they're interested in doing. There's this kid, Josue, next door to Eastie Farm, and he's bilingual. I'm not. So when he shows up, and he's like doing food service or whatever, he says to me, "You go home. I got this." It's East Boston. A lot of people speak Spanish. You don't speak Spanish that well, so you go. So he's just like he's willing to take that role and just answer people and solve problems. So that's not common, but you do need to create that space where such youth do exist. They have the room to exercise that ability and tendency they have. So I think that placemaking is key.
I agree with that entirely. And it was a hard lesson for me to learn early on, that when I was trying to start the garden, that I had expectations that people would pitch in certain ways. And when I just stepped back and said, I'm doing this because I want to do it, and other people will do what they want to do, it allowed me to see that people were pitching in. They just weren't doing what I thought they should be doing, but they were doing much useful and other kinds of things. And so recognizing that and taking advantage of it is a much better strategy.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Another thing we've done is we've raised money to pay volunteers. So anybody who's somewhat regular, we actually pay them so that they don't feel like it's a job. They can come whenever they can, serve whenever they can, but they will still be compensated for that. That made it easy for a lot of people to get involved. So, as I said, economic inequity is an ongoing issue. It's a national, maybe even a global issue. To the extent that you can help people economically, that helps them get involved. There are a lot of young people who really want to get involved in measures like this, but they also have to make a living. So they often go out and get a job in the evening. You're tired from having worked for 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours of your waking, energetic time. So that to the extent you can make it possible to let people come in and work and be compensated for that, that's really helpful.
We just have a few minutes left. I wanted to, Talia said the problem is there's more buildings going up than green spaces. And that's, I think, true in both JPs, both Jeffreys Point and Jamaica Plain. And thank you, Susan, for your thoughtful conversation.
And Heather has her hand up.
Okay, so let me unmute Heather. Oh, she's unmuted. Good.
Thank you. So you talk about funding, and funding on being volunteers is amazing. Can you talk a little bit about the process and the knowledge that, like, do you have a background in, like, where fundraising and grant writing and all of that are skills, and not everyone has it. So could you talk a little bit about, you spoke a little bit about who funds, but a little bit more about where you get funding, but also the skills and how you got those skills.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Very good question. How much time do we have?
We have about 7 more minutes, but it's a hard stop. So
okay, all right.
I should have told you 5.
No, that's all right. So you're right. It's a very different kind of skill to write grants. And people often think that you have to come up with a lot of, I'll say, BS. Stuff that sounds good, empty verbiage that sounds great. This is what the grantor wants to hear. So I need to be able to write in flowery language, amazing things. And I personally find it to be not true. Not true. If you're doing good work, and if you got some good ideas, and if you can show some experiments you've done, like a poor man's version of what your idea was and how you've been actually able to make a little way towards your goal, then that gives any grantor the confidence that you mean what you're talking about. You're not asking for $300,000 to do something you haven't even taken the first step in. You're asking for $30,000 or $3,000 for something you're already doing with $300, right? So I think that when grantors see that, I think it gives them pause. Even if it's not written in the most wonderful way, they think about it, and maybe they won't give you 3,000, maybe they give you 1,000. So you get started that way, is what I would say. But you're right, it's a skill. but there are people available. You have to go out and look for them and search for them, but you don't have to hire somebody. You could just, it's going to be a one-off that you write a small thing in. Not everything has to be done as a full-fledged organization that's funded and has spaces and has a fax machine. No, we learned during COVID, we could do a lot from home. So what can you do with a little that gets you a little way, and then you go from there, just like a tree grows, from a seed to a little sapling, and then before you know it, a humongous thing that hosts birds and bees and all that. So did I do it within 5 minutes, Mary?
You did. You're perfect. We're right on time. Bruce, did you want? No. Does anybody have? Okay, Brucey, sorry. Thank you so much, Kanan, and thank you everyone who attended.
Thank you, Mary, for facilitating. Thanks again, Michelle, for organizing, and thank you for the participants for listening and for the great questions. And I can put my email in here if people would like to stay in touch. And I'm sure there'll be more questions that you think of later on tonight. Like, I should have asked him that. So you can feel free to email me, and happy to keep the conversation going.